Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Pat's Mythos. My name is Pat. Today's video, I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into some books that didn't work for me. Now, I figure when you're watching a booktube channel, it's a good idea to let viewers know what your taste is. What books do you really like? What books do you love? I think a good step in the opposite direction, but with the same end goal, would be to talk about some books that I didn't love or didn't like very much. I think I know my tastes well at this point, so I don't really run into that many books that I don't like or really don't enjoy very much or just overall hate. So when I really have a book that I don't like, it kind of stands out to me and I think it's worth talking about. I definitely wouldn't say these are all books that I hate. They're just books that maybe didn't work for me or didn't work for me in comparison to how much other people seem to enjoy them. The first book on this list that I'd like to talk about is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I gave this book, I want to say 2 stars or 2.5 stars, and that's probably the lowest rating I've given a book since I began reading again as an adult back in 2017. Now, I have to admit, this was the third book that I read when I started reading again for the first time, and so I didn't really know my tastes yet. So I didn't know that I might not like this. But that being said, I read the description and thought it sounded really cool. Neil Gaiman's book, American Gods, is about basically a world where the gods that people who come to America bring with them, all the different melting pot of cultures, the gods they bring with them come to America and have their own cultural existence or power within the realms of the United States. That was what I was sold. And what I got really didn't feel like that. Yes, there are those American gods present in the book, but I guess I expected them to be more present. I think I thought that they would have a more impact or force in the actual driving narrative of the book and be a little bit more concrete. It felt like, there were these gods, but they were kind of off to the side sometimes. And so we spend a lot of time with this main character, Shadow, who I really just didn't find to be that interesting. Neil Gaiman, he can get weird. And I don't know if I was ready for the level of weird that is present in this book. Towards the end, things get very strange, and I think a lot of it went over my head. I wouldn't consider myself a very philosophical reader. I don't read for themes all that much. Sometimes I do. But especially back then when I was new to reading, I definitely wasn't looking for that. And so what I got was this kind of philosophical, strange road trip book, and it just wasn't what I expected. I expected these American gods, these ever-present, powerful beings with strong characters and powers facing off, almost like I guess like the Avengers or something. I thought that we were going to see gods battling it out and this high, I guess, really high epic work, and it's just not that. That's not what American Gods is. It's different, and maybe it'd be something I'd revisit many years from now, just to see if maybe years of reading has changed my taste. But as of now, did not like it at all. And for my next book that I wasn't a huge fan of is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. This one made the booktube fantasy community hype round a couple years ago. It was a first book by an author named Nicholas Eames, as I mentioned, and it had a really cool premise. It's sort of like a classic rock-inspired fantasy with a band of mercenaries getting back together and hitting the road, which I love classic rock. I love the whole rock culture from that day and age, and the idea really did sound cool to me, laid over a fantasy setting. I consider myself a rock fan, but I felt like a lot of the references ended up going over my head anyways. The characters, there were some funny moments, there was some good character work, I have to admit, but the world building didn't really interest me. The overall plot, I didn't really care about what was happening. By the end, I was kind of just dragging my feet to finish it. And in principle, I liked the book. I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. This is one of those situations where I think I expected a little more than what I got. It seemed like left and right, people were giving this 5 stars, 5 stars, 4.5 stars, loving it, and I just thought it was just okay. It just felt like maybe there was something missing for me. I know so many people love this book. This one just didn't land with me. I was really excited actually to continue on to Bloody Rose, which is the second book in that series, and I don't think the third book has come out yet. Again, the whole premise of these rock-inspired fantasy books really had me excited. Unfortunately, I decided not to continue on with the Bloody Rose. I just didn't see myself loving it. And yeah, unfortunately, Kings of the Wild, I liked it. It was okay, 3.5 stars, but it just didn't land with me the way it seems to land with a lot of other people. And my next book on this list is actually the only book I've DNF'd in the last 5 to 6 years since I began reading, and that is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and when I heard that he was writing some kind of fantasy book called Fairy Tale, I got really excited. I was hoping for Dark Tower connections. I was hoping for some strong horror elements. I thought the sky's the limit when it comes to Stephen King writing a fantasy book. Unfortunately, it didn't end up being what I wanted. And I think that a lot of other King readers felt in the same way as me in this one. So the book doesn't even start fantasy at all. For maybe the first third or 40%, it's slice of life, typical Stephen King main town, it's a young guy taking care of an older fella in his neighborhood who had an injury, and they bond. And a lot of people actually like this part of the book, but I really thought it was just okay. I was really itching for the fairy tale, the fantasy elements to kick in. And once they did, it wasn't any better. I guess in the end, it really was just a simple fairy tale. I mean, I did DNF it at about halfway or maybe 60%. So I don't really know how the rest of the story went. There was like one moment in particular that was keeping me going in this book. So I was like, I'm going to continue it, right? And that actually ended up happening not long after we get into that whole fantasy world that I was talking about. And then I had still like 40% of the book left, and I just was not interested. I had kind of gotten one answer that I was really looking for. And I was looking at my TBR, and I remember I was about to start, my next book was going to be Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. And I was looking at Fairy Tale, and I was like, I just don't feel like reading this. It's just meh. I love Stephen King, but Fairy Tale was just not hitting for me, and I have zero regrets about DNFing it. I know I wasn't alone in that regard. A lot of people told me that they wish they had, because by the time they finished it, it wasn't even worth it. And Golden Fool ended up being awesome, and I'm glad I even got to start it early because I DNF'd Fairy Tale. Sorry, Stephen King. I love you. I love your books. I probably won't DF any others in the future. I hope that this doesn't become a trend with your modern books, but yeah, Fairy Tale just didn't work for me. Okay, now that I've gone over a couple of books that didn't land with me, I think I'll next go into some series that I sort of felt the same way about. The first series that really didn't land with me was Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. So I actually did read the first four novellas in this series. I'd never gone on to the additional novellas or full-length books that have come out. I read the first four novellas. I think I gave the first one 3.5 stars and the rest 4 stars. And it doesn't sound that bad, especially with those 4 stars in there. But I have a particular gripe about these books that I'll get into. So as you know, these are novellas. They're meant to be, 1 to 200 pages, quick read. And overall, there were some aspects I really liked. However, there were some parts of them that really bogged down the reading experience in a way that they just weren't what I was looking for when I read them. So I went into Murderbot expecting these kind of light, easy, quick novels, and they're definitely quick. They're pretty short, and they have a pretty cool sci-fi world. And the story of Murderbot is you're following Murderbot, the title character, which is this basically half human, half robot hybrid. It's a security bot that goes on planetary missions and different things across this intergalactic empire that exists within the books. The difference about Murderbot compared to other units like them is that Murderbot has actually hacked its protocol that allows it to be sentient and know itself and not have to take orders, but it follows them anyways most of the time. And overall, the actual character of Murderbot was kind of fun and interesting to read about. My main gripe with this book comes with the way that the Murderbot interacts with the sci-fi world. So like I said, each book follows Murderbot on some type of mission on a planet or a base or something in space where it needs to protect its humans that it's working with. And I found that some of the sequences in here really were bogging me down, despite this supposed to be, it's supposed to be this like quick sci-fi read. There's a lot of like hacking and breaking into the server and the net, and then I replace the feed of this with this and that, and I switch the blah blah blah, and there's just all this sci-fi kind of like cyberpunk jargon that is thrown in there, and it actually like weighs down the reading experience because I'm looking for this like lighter read, and suddenly I have to pay really close attention to each step-by-step process in the Murderbot breaking into these systems and all these things, which on paper is still really cool and actually well done by Martha Wells. It's just that for what I was looking for from these books, it just wasn't working for me. It was not smooth. It wasn't what I wanted from a quick sci-fi novella. So like I said, Murderbot, I gave them mostly 4 stars. I enjoyed them quite a bit. It just wasn't working well enough for me to continue on through several other novellas and full-length novels. I do recommend you trying it out and seeing if it works for you. I just know for me, it just wasn't going to work. And last but not least, the other series I want to talk about today that just didn't quite work for me is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. So when I started Red Rising, I was still trying to break into sci-fi. I had only read fantasy pretty much. The sci-fi I had read really hadn't clicked with me. And based on everything I'd heard about Red Rising, everyone said this is fast paced. This is almost like a fantasy in space, the way it's built up. Good characters, strong action, and these books just zip by. If you think that sci-fi is too thematic or too thought centered or theme centered, then Red Rising's for you. You'll love it. And at first, I really thought I did. Everyone knows with Red Rising, they say you got to get through the first book. It's just like Hunger Games. You just got to get through it, and then things get really good in the second book. I actually did like the first book for what it was. I mean, everyone warned me that it would be terrible, but I ended up giving it 4 stars. And I ended up giving the next 2 books 4 stars as well. I gave all 3 books 4 stars. Again, it didn't quite work for me in the sense that they were fine. They were 4 stars. They were good. But based on what everyone else was telling me, I was expecting, especially the second and third books to be these insane, epic 5-star reads. And it just didn't land for me that way. So as I said, I enjoyed book 1. I got into book 2, and I was really enjoying it for the first half. I felt fully immersed, and I kind of felt like this is the hype that I was told about. Like, this is cool. We were getting to this, galaxy-spanning epic, and things were going down. It was cool, different from the first book, and I was loving it. And then all of a sudden, something clicked for me, and I realized that the style in which Pierce Brown wrote this series was just not going to work for me. First of all, it's all from the point of view of the main character, Darrow. There's no secondary POVs, not even for a single moment, I don't think. Every single word is from first person present of the main character, Darrow. And so when things were happening in this, grand story, and there were things happening away from Darrow in the story, and I'm thinking to myself, that seems so important and seems so awesome to read about. I really wish we weren't stuck with Darrow right now. And so then I had this feeling of just felt like I was missing something in the story, because in other big series, you have multi POVs and you witness things through other POVs, but that's not the case with Red Rising. You're stuck with Darrow, and that ended up being kind of the nail in the coffin for me in this book. In addition, I didn't like the first person present of Darrow. I mean, being stuck with Darrow was one thing, but I think over time, the actual type of author voice, or the first person perspective present, whatever it's called, that over time wore me down. At first, I didn't mind it, but then when the other problems started coming in with Darrow as a POV, it just made it worse. And the icing on the cake was a choice that Pierce Brown made at the end of Morningstar, which is book 3, that relates to these POVs, that I thought was kind of like story breaking. Like it didn't change my rating. I gave it 4 stars because overall, I thought that the books were good. They were decent. I liked them. But looking back, I probably would bring my rating down to like 3.5. And this one hurts me to say, because I know a lot of people have gone on and, whether they love the first trilogy or not, they've gone on to the sequel books and just love them. And I know the new books coming out, Lightbringer, I'm kind of jealous that I won't be in on that hype. I don't see myself at the moment continuing on with Red Rising, despite giving them all 4 stars. I just don't know if Pierce Brown's style will ever really work for me. So that's it, everybody. I hope I didn't step on too many toes if I mentioned one of your favorite books. I think it's just as important to talk about the books you don't like as the books you do when it comes to understanding yourself as a reader and getting a feel for your tastes. So again, none of these books did I truly hate. They just didn't work for me. And if you have a defense for what I said, please drop in the comments. Let me know. Tell me why I'm wrong and why you think I should give these books another try, maybe. Or if you agree and have the same gripes as me, I'd love to hear about it. If you stayed here till the end, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day. See ya.